My name is Fred Marchant, and I welcome you to our event, The Thing with Feathers. And I want to thank Mass Poetry, of course. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank my colleagues, Justin, Oliver, and Jenny Franklin, and Jenny especially for organizing this panel. I'm going to begin, I was supposed to say one salient fact about myself. One salient fact that I'm going to read from my most recent book, 2017, but still most recent book, Said Not Said, from Grey Wolf Press. I'm going to read a sequence of poems about my older sister who suffered lifelong with schizophrenia. But we're going to begin with Emily Dickinson. And we're going to begin with poem number 254, for those of you who know. The poem is, in fact, the inspiration, really, in complicated ways of our panel, our reading, and our discussion. So it's the one about hope. She puts hope in quote marks, by the way. Hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words. It never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard. And sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it on the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. It is, as with all of her poems, multifaceted. And I have friends who think of it as an image of hope, offering an image of hope that's relatively passive. You know, it's something inside us that simply is and chirps away without content even. And I sort of read it a bit differently. I think of it as a potential that is within us and does indeed chirp away, but it's music. It's music that's within us that also sort of has contact points with words as words may come to it. In fact, I think of it as maybe even the foundation of poetry. It calls words unto itself. I think that those words themselves and that music of hope actually has some significance both for individuals and beyond in our society. For instance, it can provide an opportunity for song and music and words to bear witness to our other topic today, trauma, and those who suffer from it in any sort. And that is to say that bearing witness is itself, the singing of it in some way, it does many things. It moves, I think, a little bit each of the parties closer to one another. The worst thing about, of course, such suffering is that terrible feeling of loneliness and aloneness even. And so this kind of hope has some consequence when words especially are attached to it, I think. And we were talking and we think that maybe it has some social consequence. That is to say, when there are collective traumas and there are silences and the part of the self and the soul of a group, of a society even, that is singing can draw words unto itself to maybe bear witness to that which people don't want to talk about. This all reminds me of Václav Havel's great description of hope. It's not the same as optimism. Hope is actually doing something because it's inherently worth doing. And I think that thing with feathers inside us feels the same way as Václav Havel. I'm going to read this poem from Said Not Said, my book. It's a poem, the opening section of the book has, in fact, it's 4 poems, and it's a sequence. The whole section is really devoted to my sister. I learned somewhere just before this book came out that I looked at my own work past, and I noticed that every time I published a book, there was something about it. One poem or another had something about my sister, and I never really understood why, except, she was always on my mind. And so I took, she passed away, and I took on the task of thinking more about it and writing more about it. This is called The Unacceptable. And it's got 4 parts. Part 1, how? How do you write about a cough? How to hint at the sound of it. A cough that was odd, not from a cold or something you catch. I think now it was the sound of what was eating away my sister's mind. I first heard it at our grandfather's funeral mass. I was 7 and thought she should just quit it. Stop bothering me and everyone. For 40 years. Howard. Her life spent on William A. Howard's farm. Howard, the short form for what was originally the asylum for the incurable. How the gentle Patuxent stream flowed past, and how I composed a song she could sing under her blanket. Oh, bless this sweet layer of wool, bless my warm halo of heat. How the illness clutched her by the neck, tossed her up and let her go. And in the second before she landed, how she thought she might escape, could drift away like smoke from a long drag on her cork-tipped cool. How the sound of the rust bucket trawler named Memory followed her wherever she went. Its iron nets dragged across the floor of her being, the silt clouds and debris fields, a stern winch sounding a lot like pain. How she ached to have them examine what they pulled up there, some of it thrown back, some saved in the ice hold, a few scaled creatures to be studied in the labs, their weird antediluvian appendages, their would-be limbs. How rage at times so transformed her face, I was sure she and Nero had gone fishing in the lake of darkness, and I had become the sane but cleverly gibbering Edgar, hiding in the hollow of a tree. Howard, a downbeat, an offbeat, a first note in the music we heard when the kitchen knife found its home in her hand as she reached into the drawer. How the legal involuntary moved in and imposed itself because the great orange snowplows out on the midwinter highway were trying to run her down. Part 3, me. To her, I was Aries' sunlit ice, a comet tail in an elliptical, once-in-a-while orbit of vague portent, a streaky omen, with nothing much to say anymore, just the rest of my self-comforting ditty. Bless the blanket over her head and under her feet. Bless the hands that weave the thread. Bless the sheet they sheared it from. Our Father, meaning to protect me, said it would be good for me to visit and see this. So I would know how not to end up here or there or wherever Howard was, it would be in my life someday. I too wanted to give that place and her a world of birth. The Xmas visits, all I ever had to do, really. Just get a box with a stick-on ribbon, some CVS shampoo, wrap it in paper name, printed with holly, candles, Victorian joy. An hour in the Howard parking lot, my father and I signing her out to the back seat where she opened what we brought her, a chocolate interlude, an engine idling, the heat on. Our spot outside her own red brick house and her wherefore ward, decked out year after year in the tinsel and the garlands of disordered thought. Howard, our one and only name for the world headquarters, the genuine article, the real deal schizophrenia, its live-in campus to the left of the cornfields, just off Route 2 and heading south out of Providence. Part 4, her. Her last day on the planet, she thrashed and spit while the nurses tied her wrists to the bed rail with strips of cloth that only worsened what was happening. Her face was radiant, her whole being flushed from the long struggle with those she knew she should never have trusted. They tried to keep track of her vitals, charted her erratic heart, peered into her cranium with a flashlight through the eyes. She said they had taped a death line to the port in her arm. They said she should believe in the plastic tube in her nose, that it would fill her lungs with good, clean air. She shook her head as hard as she could, got her whole body to say, nope, thou shalt not, no way, nothing doing, thou shalt not touch me. Not with the elbow bendable straw adjusted to the lips, not with the insidious needle pointed upward and dribbling over, and absolutely not with that wheezing apparatus of the unacceptable the attendant in his scrubs was wheeling in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. That was an amazing reading. And no matter how many times I hear those poems, I learn something new every time. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to Massachusetts Poetry Festival for choosing this panel that we put forth to you. Thank you to the volunteers, the organizers, everyone. We really appreciate this. I'm going to start by reading a small segment of a large poem by Paul Celan. It may seem counterintuitive that he's, for me, a great poet of hope because he did, in fact, later commit suicide. But it is my strong theory that that he stayed around a lot longer than he would have if he did not have poetry. A quote from Celan, he said, the only thing remained reachable, only one thing remained reachable, close and secure amid all losses, language. Yes, language. In spite of everything, it remained secure against loss. And for him to be able to write in German, his mother's language, but in the same language of the people who killed his parents, it took a lot of strength, and I think what we're defining as hope. And this is Stretto, and it was translated by Pierre Jarisse. Displaced into the terrain with the unmistakable track, grass written asunder, the stones white with the stalk shadows. Stop reading, look, stop looking, go, go, your hour has no sisters, you are at home. A wheel slowly rolls out of itself. The spokes climb, climb on a blackish field. Night needs no stars. Nowhere are you asked after. Was opinion. How did we grasp each other with these hands? Rises and plays along in owl flight near petrified leprosy, near our fled hands in the latest fault lines, above the bullet trap on the ruined wall, visible again, the furrows, the choirs, back then, the psalms, Hosanna. The temples still stand. A star still has its light. Nothing, nothing is lost. And these are my poems, and they're from my latest book, No Small Gift, by Four Way Books. Thank you to Four Way and Martha Rhodes for publishing it. This is the first poem in the book, and it frames the losses that I'm dealing with in all of the poems. My daughter's diagnosis with intractable epilepsy and profound autism, and my own tongue cancer. So this is not a love story. These rooms are not my home. The last tulips stuffed in cut glass were not witness to betrayal. The child was not always crying, or worse, the dog was not put down. 6 Delft plates perched on a mahogany shelf, did not crash to the floor like weapons. My room was not stripped of furniture, so I could recline in its cold arms. The man who wanted us to take vows in church did not give me a disease that bloomed into malignancy. My doctor, his colleague, did not help him hide it. Another surgeon did not take a long slice of my tongue. My Sicilian mother did not beg God for vengeance. He did not tell me I would be alone for the rest of my life before he abandoned our child. I did not wait 5 years to admit I still have a body, nor 7 to be loved for the first time. He will not always want my scarred neck under his wrist. This is called hubris. We flew to Venice to conceive you. Now I realize the folly to create life in an unreal city burdened by sinking churches. I wanted you to begin like a gold mosaic, folded in Vivaldi like cherub wings. My punishment is simple. Your legacy mirrors that of obsolete palaces. Every lit window wide open to the Grand Canal. All the exquisite rooms empty. This one is called Another School. The unkempt boys crawl away barefoot from their teachers. The principal masks reality with stories and props, pretense of teaching. On display like rare animals in the zoo, the children stare, but not at us. If only I could calm their bodies that cannot keep still, tell them I too drown the silences of this world with my own song. But I can't catch the gaze of even one. We will all be buried in outer borough cemeteries, and none of this will matter. But until then, each moment is a gaping mouth of want. The boys don't care if we stay or leave. Every day is the same headline news. Each child here was born in a white hospital room, stamped with normal APGAR scores by arrogant doctors, and set howling. I cannot be restored to that antiseptic bed where I took mine to my breast, unaware what asylum was in store. I need another hour to hold her fat, red face in its cotton cloister, to unknow all this, to be astonished by her halo of dark hair, to drown in her temporary blue eyes. This one is called Humankind Cannot Bear Very Much Reality. Takes its title from Eliot. When I was your age, I read Gatsby for the first time and cringed when Daisy hoped her daughter would grow up to be a beautiful little fool. All you read are songbooks and sing to yourself out of tune. At least you will never believe in fairy tales or blame me for walking out after we were betrayed. Like Sisyphus, I push away all thoughts of statistics, the caretakers who will overdose you with your anti-seizure drugs to keep you still. It is your birthday again. The few people who love you celebrate, but only the two of us know we have no cause. You sit beside a fancy cake that you refuse to taste, and you try to blow out the candles. I cannot extinguish this small fire. Days like this, I wish we were both Daisy's little fools, side by side in narrow asylum beds, hiding from the horror together. And this poem is called While Waiting, Godot Interrupts. And it has a line from the play Waiting for Godot that keeps repeating, which is, maybe it would be better if we parted. And Beckett changes the syntax of it throughout the poem. So I do the same. While waiting, Godot interrupts. Sometimes I ask questions I know you will not answer, like if you feel sick or if our ancestors invented cave painting or song first. You never lie to me because you do not speak. How can I still believe in language? Do words have more weight than those bags we carry, have meaning? You could think me an ignorant fool for believing. You could think. The behaviorists tell me your tears do not mean you're in pain, neither psychic nor physical, that crying is a habit to pass time like hamsters running a wheel or shopping for clothes we don't need. We go on alone together, our arms intertwined, nothing if not love. Your warm face, fat with life, is not afraid of the dark or any other usual thing, though the sound of certain words, lake, daddy, doctor, are enough to pin you to the floor in fear. When you hear them, you scream, take it off, as if words were masks one can wear to undo us. Still, we both speak some lines in this little dwelling, our own ditch and tree. Every spring, the palm pretends it is dying, yellow leaves waving like arms conducting an SOS, and overnight, improbable, 5 new shoots. You line things up, spin, skip across the room. When you allow me, I play Bach. No, thank you, please. As I try to divert you with songs and little stories, too much, too much. Sometimes you noose stick rope around my neck. Other times I do. Maybe it would be better if we parted. Mostly you take charge. People tell me you're happier than most, that you're blessed, like some animal on the farm, a pig, ignorant of her own impending doom. You stand on one leg, your lovely body contorted in unnatural shapes. When you're happy, you're happy. When you cry, you're not, whatever the doctors claim. The walls and river must be terribly bored watching us. The moment you walk through the door, you take siege of this place with only time before us. I try to teach you to wash yourself, to put on your own boots. If we parted, that might be better for us. When you fall asleep, I cover you with green wool. Every day we wake and plot our escape. No longer safe to take you outside alone. The prison of our apartment no longer figurative. I'm all done. Everything you know of the world you discover from one bay window. We can still part if you think it would be better if we could exist apart from each other. And the last poem I'm going to read today is the last poem in my book, and it's the hopeful poem. And it's called, in this version of the story, there are no birds. Revenge is not a child's severed head held by the hair and flung into the face of a faithless father. The cruel hate nothing more than to witness love. Imagine a father sentenced to stare into the face of his daughter and see only fear. In this version, revenge belongs to the mother and her child, the lucky ones. For them, love is not a choice. Revenge means they're together despite tragedy. When they carry flowers home to cut the stems, arrange them in the Sicilian jug, they're not trying. They recognize the face of contentment. In this version, there are no birds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was beautiful. And if you haven't read her book or any of her books, I really recommend it because birds are such a motif in the book. So it really takes on this deep resonance at the end. And hearing, by the way, I'm Justin Wymer. Hi. I'm really grateful to be part of this wonderful opportunity with poets I admire. Something I've been thinking about in hearing your and Fred's work is like how difficult it is to look at a painful subject head on. And the evidence, like the style of the poem about trauma or about witness, kind of comes in how directly you can look at that subject. Because if you think back, like trauma was originally defined as a psychical wound, right? Like it was a wound of the mind. And trauma at its core is defined as a wound. So what it looks like is, you know, a lot of times you'll return in this loop to the traumatic event, right? You'll return and you'll return and you'll return and you'll try to make sense of this fractured memory, but you don't really come to any resolution because you can't look at that wound. That wound is a void. So I really admire your poems because you're able to look at some traumatic events in ways that I haven't yet, you know, I can't look at it that directly yet. But I do have a few poems I'll read today. I'm originally from West Virginia, and West Virginia is the heart of the opioid epidemic. And, you know, personal trauma becomes intergenerational trauma that, you know, starts mutating genes and people become more likely to become addicted to things like that. And I'm going to read some poems about my brother, who has struggled with, you know, substance misuse throughout a lot of his life, and my mother as well, who that combined with a variety of mental disabilities and sicknesses, like it kind of becomes this imbricate, you know, difficult thing to deal with. But it's also a muse, right? And I think part of the hope of writing about these extreme trauma things is that, you know, writing a poem is evidence of life lived. So through the act of writing the poem itself, you're implying that there can be hope once the poem is ended. So the first one I will read is, actually, I'll start with the brother, because the last poem I have to read has the brother and the mother in it. So this one is entitled Benediction. Let me see my time, 1:30. Brother, when we spoke last, you'd lain down in the tug and crave of powder, convinced me your veins were lit as streets on the night of a famous death. I tried forgetting what I saw then, bought soap from the pharmacy. The Sibyl outside it snorting salts off her forearm told me the city had a shortage of fish. 5 of her tongues I listened into were blackbirds, the others the black creases between the hills of a fishing town. Brother, I carved the soap for you. The knife made a nail. The nail I stuck in the hole in the mirror, wishing it were a bell. Brother, I fear you'll start crossing the street, unaware your soul's a summary fragment. My soul is a law on fire, the kiss in the air before dragonflies fold their wings in vague human anguish. Why are there more than 2 of things? Why are princes never holding shovels? Brother, of course there are 2 of you. One of you sleeps beside me, massaging the milky rake of my spine. The other rocks on a grave holding an egg. My clothes are getting sour and gray. I try not to remember how to swallow. When she asked me for fish, the Sibyl smelled of fruit stalls the day before the plums are rearranged. She stood before me in the town you live in now, folded her wings back, her teeth exact, bracelet beads, and said, "Your soul's a summary fragment." A what? Yes. Of what? No. Brother, when I wake, I wonder which new knife you'll barter for today, for a bag of powder, whether you'll offer a bracelet or an egg. It's what you have. Brother, I won't bother to offer you now kind revelations in a clean jar, 3 peas wrapped in silk in a rucksack with peppercorns to even the smell when the hand inside it turns. Brother, I turn to you when there's too much light to say. I remember this instant things are growing skin, adding history their flesh to their flesh, our flesh. The soul happens to you then, as it happens to them. I hope to dip my hands in the well with you again. Please sleep well. I hope you dream of halls of glass. So that's one poem. I mean, comes at it from an angle, right? But it does start with the genesis of finding somebody, from an overdose, and then what happens when you start looking at things, sideways, and what images does that populate your imagination with? This one I will read is entitled What Proof You Need of Love. And it takes as its genesis my mother, who she was injured when she was, I guess, 30 something. And then, one back surgery became another back surgery, became another back surgery, became, a pump that was implanted for pain medication combined with lots of other things. And then the brother becomes part of this poem. So this is, it takes place, maybe this will help, it takes place at a hospital. And it's entitled What Proof You Need of Love. With room enough and change, the woman wept a gracious fit. She had Dolly Parton hair she'd left, let lay a tease of half-pearl spokes, and her accent wasn't right. She knew how doctors always think the worst. When here your eldest son can't hide that he's a dead man to a few, and you can't trust yourself to think in proper poses. Leave the bank and show up here and make him do, and keep in mind to use your jaw to say your D's. Here, there, I can't pretend she doesn't love him. Born a while, the two keep on remembering how this will always happen. In the room where clear hoses hang, the rollout couch's vinyl scrapes. The wall clock's constant as a dull swathe plow. The cemetery zinnias are shocked to waken, stamens stable. Sun should know enough of birds to name them, whether wrong or good, to make her stop her rippling hands and bracelet ripping, to keep the prayers at bay. I cannot say I think in nows. My home is still, and still is null. All the null hydrangeas, the ones without some blue or pink or green, she gets to thinking. And I know then, so far away, I've still made death unwelcome in her house. Some hours pass. Where'd she got to? A shoulder wasn't worth the risk despite the one she had, bred socket sand. A risk isn't a risk when it hides 2 inches below where no one thinks to look, below the track marks, to find and pick the heart up, drop it in for tithe. She can breathe just fine if careful, don't strain. She did think last night, the heart pill, the heart. I will never say she did or never would. I am in the lobby, now on the sidewalk gravel, around the bushes. She is coughing. The bush is coughing greeny hydrangeas. We are out picking hydrangeas. You don't need proof. It's proof enough. We're holding hands. Our violet nails died through, and you still are. So thank you all. That's all I have for now, and I will turn it over to Oliver.
Justin, that was beautiful. And thank you, Fred, Jennifer, and Justin for putting this wonderful panel together. And thank you, Mass Poetry. And I'm so glad that you're back. I'm so glad that you're back. I really missed this wonderful event. And thank you all in the audience for coming this afternoon. I'm going to read 4 poems. One poem is going to be a cover, and then 3 poems of my own. And the cover poem that I'm going to read is from Shira Ehrlichman's book, Odes to Lithium, which is a really outstanding book where the speaker speaks about her neurodiversity, her struggles, and her triumphs. And the poem that I'm reading is entitled Needle. Needle. 3, 2, 1. Exact as a bully, my dark syrup filling 1 vial. 2. I watched the slow reddening, rendering of human sap. It's a monthly ritual to allow a stranger to collect what is inside me for assessment, a shadow of poison or clear skies. Here sits a woman partitioned into numbers which swell truthfully, kindly, tiny comprehensions of vastness charted by a professional eye. But even as the nurse counts down, casts the needle's fishing line, pulls down into delicate vials, I know what the sea knows, with the bottom of its mind unfathomed. It's an exceptional book. I recommend that you get it. So it's so interesting to hear the stories of these books. Jennifer's narrative is very similar to mine. Upon the birth of my first son, I was diagnosed with cancer. And my third book, which is entitled Requiem for the Orchard, is sort of a book that I wrote in a moment of crisis and in a moment of wanting to create a particular type of monument in case, cancer got the best of me. And so I'm going to read 2 poems from this collection and then one from my newest. Ablation as the creation of Adam. The world is always beginning. A face sweeps over in the vertigo of anesthesia, a light gauze or a saline wash. Something to ease me into this century tells me about the first darkness. In the beginning, there was a whole me. There was an end I could not see, and there were sounds. A siren set the hounds off. In between crickets, a radio. And between the radio, the hush of a respirator. The aurora of the surgical lamp formed blue rings behind shut eyes. Let there be, and there was. Gossamer thin, the numbed pulse. Pulse, the memory of the heart. Heart, the now tongue, the here flower. Useless is the thing taken out of the body. Little stinkweed, little broken thrush. What's left? A socket, a keyhole. I used to have something to mess. Now my neck's a rattle trap. Thus, my body was corrected. A hand moved the waters and said, flesh be done, and it was done. Evening, morning, the sterile tube shunted into my neck, and it was good. I rose fawn weary. The stun of spiced cleaner cooled the room. Nothing like the clean of new world with my new nun body, my hardly notice. A new clock is wound behind the curtain. The cut is now a blush. Apoplectic ravine, cave scrawl, my zippered nest, pink ellipses, I shall name you my flamingo. Somewhere, birds rise above the African coast like blown tissue. The volcanic sun silhouettes their wings as they lift off. Then the dizzy horizon. And then I'll read one more from that series, or that sequence. I was really trying to find some metaphorical language for the sense, the sensation. And so basically I fell to the simile where I was comparing 2 disparate things. I was trying to sort of make a connection between these 2 disparate things. The surgical theater as spirit cabinet. I am without wings and obsessed with each patient's dark physics, the way their eyes are the copper bells signaling the end of intermission. It is here I come to peel away all guarantees, gurneys line the hallway, some of them empty, some with old men or children hooked to machines whose hum is something I can sleep against. If this is what I'll become, then let me turn into a puff of smoke. Let me hide in the warm linings of a pocket. Somewhere behind me, men talk through their masks, and as they speak, I feel the space between the air and my body. It is too bright, and the world becomes unknowable. There is a chasm of indifferences as I am pushed to the double door. It's also rehearsed. Before my turn, I think about what I love the most and remember the audience, the man whose wallet is found in his neighbor's bustier, or the woman's watch now on the wrist of the magician. I know that's not love, but a sleight of hand. Presto, our lives bound from out of a top hat. Now you see me, and soon I'll be sawed in two. My brain sets its wavelengths on the flourish of the sorcerer's cape, the voice's redirection, and the sotto voce of the operating room's radio. There is nothing up their sleeves, and I'm beginning to understand my body as the little curtain closes. The magician's assistant disappears, slips through the trapdoor soundlessly. My own thin voice, the hollow slap of a hand on a cabinet. Thank you. And I'm going to close with a longer piece from my latest book. It's entitled The Boy in the Labyrinth. So very similar to Jennifer, I am the father of 3 neurodiverse children. And one of the things that I struggled with was how to write about them and whether or not I had the right to write about them. And it is still something that I struggle with. And so what I want to clarify before I read this piece is that the point of view is that of a neurotypical parent who is struggling with these assessments that we are supposed to fill out in the process of understanding our children. And I do want to say, first of all, that there are 2 voices in this poem. There's the voice of the questionnaire and then the voice of the neurotypical parent. The title of this poem is Autism Screening Questionnaire, Speech and Language Delay. I'll be reading parts of it, not all of it. Did your child lose acquired speech? A font and then silence. A nun, an ellipse between, his breath through the seams of our windows, whistle of days, impossible bowl of a mouth, the open cupboard, vowels rounded up and swept under the rug. Does your child produce unusual noises or infantile squeals? He'd coo and we'd coo back. The sound passed back and forth between us like a ball, or later an astral voice, some vibrato under the surface of us, the burst upon, burn of strings rubbed in a flourish, his exhausted face. Does your child speak frequent gibberish or jargon? To my ears, it is a language. Every sound a system, the sound for dog or boy, the moan in his throat for water, that of a man with thirst, the dilapidated ladder that makes a sentence a sentence. This plosive is a verb, this liquid a want. We make symbols of his noise. Does your child pull you around when he wants something? By the sleeve, by the shirt tail, his light touch hopscotching against my skin like sparrows, an insistence muscled and muscled again. Does your child have difficulty expressing his need or desires using gestures? Red-faced in the kitchen and in the bedroom, and the yellow light touches his eyes, which are open, but not there. His eyes rest in their narrow boat dream, and the canals are wide, dividing this side from this side. Is there no spontaneous initiation of speech or communication from your child? When called, he eases out of his body. His God is not our words, nor is it the words from his lips. It is entirely body. So when he comes to us and looks, we know there are beyond us impossible cylinders where meaning lives. Does your child use repetitive language, the same word or phrase over and over? A pocket in his brain worries its ball of lint. A word clicks into its groove and stammers along its track, Dopplering like a car with its window rolled down, and the one top hit of the summer angles its way into his brain. Does your child use monotonous speech or wrong pausing? When the air is true and simple, we can watch him tremble for an hour, plucking his meaning from a handful of utterances, and then ascend into the terrible partition of speech. Does your child speak the same to kids, adults, or objects? Can't differentiate. Because a reference needs a frame, we are mother and father and child with a world of time to be understood. The car radio plays its one song. The song, therefore, is important. It must be intuned at a rigorous time because rigor is important and because the self insists on constant vigils. Does your child use language inappropriately, wrong words or phrases? Always. And he insists on the incorrect forms. The wrong word takes every form for love. The good tree leans into the pond. The gray dog's ribs show. The memory bound to the window and the promise of the radio playing its song on the hour. Every wrong form is a form which represents us in our losses if it takes us another world to understand. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that reading, Oliver. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Fred. This was really powerful. We have about 10 minutes, 9 minutes to answer questions from the group. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them for you. And if there aren't questions, that's fine because we have some ideas of what we can continue talking to you about. Justin came up with some questions for the group, so we could address those if there aren't questions in the chat.
We'll give you just a second to type your message in case you do have a question that you want to ask us. But thank you. I just wanted to say aloud, these are beautiful, beautiful poems. There are so many good phrases that I would just like to excerpt and hang on my wall to remind me of, you know, evidence of life lived, right, through poetry. Really, really powerful stuff.
Jennifer, there was a question from Quentin Collins, I believe I saw come in through the chat.
Great.
Did you see it? What's your advice on managing sentimentality with this kind of writing?
That's a really good question. I think that for me, I always live in fear of sentimentality, but I do love poets who can skirt that tightrope and not fall over into sentimentality, like Jack Gilbert, Jane Kenyon, Linda Gregg. But I tend to not be too sentimental. I tend to be the opposite. So maybe someone who struggles more with it could take that.
I could talk about my strategies. So for the first two poems of my own that I read, I mentioned that I was using direct comparison. And one of the things that I wanted to do with those poems is sort of come at this trauma or this notion of trauma from an angle, to write about something that was not related to that thing and try to find some type of dressing for it, a way to transform it or to change it so that, you know, through the transference of, say, what the metaphor does. I'm not actually writing about the trauma, but I'm actually writing about the trauma in a way. And the other strategy that I employed, say, with the autism poems was I was actually just directly using the form of the questionnaire as a way to sort of confront or address my own questions or my own experiences, as a way to sort of structure my inquiry, if that makes sense.
I would also say, I mean, in thinking of workshops and poetry classes, when people talk about sentimentality, a lot of times what they mean is, you know, stock phrases or phrases that are really, really familiar, used to describe universal emotion. So I think by being as specific as possible to your own unique experiences of trauma or pain could help you, I guess, avoid some sentimentality in a way. I also think that's related in a way to what Oliver was saying about coming in on a subject at an angle, because that angle allows somebody a way into your work, even if they don't have the same experiences as you. So something like using an established form like a questionnaire, which has ready-made language that a variety of people can understand, could help you avoid sentimentality, as well as just using, like, you know, an inherited form that has with it its own rules, that structure our thought in different ways. So
I'll just offer a thought. I'm like Jennifer. I'm easily sentimental, so I have to be very suspicious of myself. And what I think about, and I'm going to also start to answer another question that's in the chat. It takes me a long while to even come near the material. You know, I don't know what I'm doing. And so my little rule of thumb is that if I'm made somewhat uncomfortable, you know, by what I'm writing, then I'm on the right trail. And if I'm starting to be happy, you know, oh, I think I really did it, then I recoil from it. That can't be true, is what I say to myself, you know, and that's my own sort of asbestos against my sentimental side, right?
Mm.
Jennifer, there was a question, and it was also something that Justin said too about things coming back, that you keep going back to a traumatic moment. And I thought that was a really important thing. I was thinking of, when I referenced it, there was always a poem about my sister. Of course, I didn't know I was coming back to it. I didn't know I was, but there it was always there, you know, and trying to resolve it. And Justin's remark about not resolving was in fact the kind of thought I had when I actually went to the material more deliberately. You know, I wasn't going to resolve it. It wasn't going to feel better. I wasn't going to help anyone. It was just going to be more, you know, that, as you say, Justin, you know, presenting a lived experience.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think going back to the whole idea of Keats's negative capability, I think that when I work on these poems about, especially the ones about my daughter's disability more than my own illness, I feel that it's important to encompass all of the feelings, not just the love, but also the grief, and not just, the burden, but the compassion as well. And I think it's really important to let yourself, when you're writing about things like this, to let yourself be brutally honest in the poem, and not to make yourself out to be the best version of yourself, to be able to really confront who you really are and who you feel. And a poem could be a snapshot of a moment of how you felt in one moment. But I think we have another, maybe time for one more question.
I'm afraid we don't. I'm going to have to cut you off there. I'm so sorry. This has been such an exciting reading and conversation. Thank you all so much. If you haven't already, poets, please put your website, social media, or book link in the chat. Don't forget to support the poets by following them and buying their books. There is much more amazing programming happening this weekend. If you're interested in attending more events, check out our website. You can also visit the virtual Small Press Fair, listen to the Improbably audio tour, visit the Acrostic Gallery, and more. Please follow Mass Poetry on our social media accounts and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. The links will be listed in the chat. Any donations go to support not just the festival, but year-round poetry programming. Thank you so much for coming to this event. We hope to see you again soon. I talked really fast because I wanted to fit as many questions as possible. Thank you all so much for this event.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Mass Poetry. Thank you to the volunteers. Thank you, Fred, Oliver, Justin. It was an honor to read with all of you.
Likewise. Thank you, everybody.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you so
all.
much.